What's going on, everybody? Today's tutorial will be working with the original Xbox console, and the issue I'm going to be dealing with is if you cannot power on your console at all, or maybe it will just quickly, when you try to hit the power button, it'll quickly light up and then shut right back off. I will also say that obviously I'm down to the motherboard and the PSU power supply unit. If you're not trying to get to this point, I'm going to put a link in the description, and that's going to be a tutorial on how you can disassemble your original Xbox and get it to this point where you can mess with it. Next thing is you're definitely going to need a soldering iron for this, and a decent one. You're not going to be able to have just like a cheap $10 crappy soldering iron, because it is going to need to be, I would say, 40 plus watts roughly, although it's more about the temperature and less about the watts, but 40 watts should get you enough to where you can desolder these. Now I've got the power supply unit out and the motherboard. Now these aren't matching, these are actually different versions, but I just grabbed whatever was on top. And the reason, I would say 90% of the time, if it won't power on, or if it kind of powers on and then shuts right off, it's going to be a busted capacitor. Now, if you don't know what a capacitor is, it's all these little round cylinder things. Now, none of the ones are busted on this. I'm just really going to desolder a good one and then solder it back in. But what you're going to be looking for here is, hopefully you'll get a good enough view. This is perfectly round. It doesn't bulge or anything on the sides, and the tops are always perfectly flat as well. If you look at it, and there's a couple things that'll be telltale signs. Sometimes the sides will bulge out some. Sometimes it's very subtle, and it only looks like it's bulging out just a little bit, but even if it bulges just a little bit, it means the capacitor is busted. The more common ways is the actual top will not be flat and it will bulge out, and in many cases there will even be like kind of a thick, pasty, brownish, reddish, gooey crap coming out of the top of it. And if you see that, if it's got this, got that little fluid stuff popping out of the top, then it's definitely a busted capacitor, definitely. And so that's what you're going to need to do. Now, you will need to get replacements, and the sides of them are clearly marked with what you'll need to get. Like this one I just pointed at is 6.3 volts, 1500 UF. You can get capacitors that are not the exact rating, but I would recommend just making sure you get the exact same one, just to be careful and just to be safe. Now, you could have busted capacitors on the motherboard or on the power supply unit. There's less of them on the power supply unit, and there's like a lot of little itty-bitty ones, like you can see right here. Hopefully that's not the ones that bust, because if it is, it's going to be a pain in your butt to try to fix that. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to desolder one of these and basically solder it right back on as though I was putting a new one in there. One thing I will tell you is that when you're putting the new capacitor in, the way it works is the two little prongs on the bottom of it, one is going to be longer than the other. The longer one is always going to be the positive side. So that's the side you always want to connect to the positive. Get my phone is going off here. Alright. So you always want to use the long side and put it in the positive. Now, good thing about capacitors is, well, let's see here. On these, it's not. Ain't that funny? But the majority of the time, like this is these are two connectors right here, and usually there will be a plus sign on one side that'll easily tell you, hey, this is where the plus has to go in. But now that I sit here and look at it, it looks like there's not. It doesn't do that with the original Xbox. So what you have to do is you just have to pay attention to how you take it out. As well as, let's see if I can get you a good view here. As you can see on this side, it's usually black, but then on this side there's a little gray marking, and that usually marks which side is plus and which side is negative. And I believe the side that's been marked is going to be plus. Now watch me be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure this side that has it on here and the prong that's on that side is going to be the plus side. And so you just need to make a note of it, which side that's on, and make sure to solder the long side of the new one in that little hole, wherever that was on here. I know that may be a little bit confusing, but just remember that it's just all about checking everything before you just start taking it apart. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out this little guy and solder him back in. The two connections are right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out my soldering iron and get some solder. And I'm really going to put a lot on there. You know, the more the merrier for this, for the actual taking it off. So you just get a lot on there. Of course my phone is going nuts right now. So you're just going to, as you're really hitting those two connections with the solder, you're just going to kind of pull the capacitor lightly from the other side. And you may have to give it just a minute to make sure that solder really gets in there and melts it. And then you just start pulling one at a time on each side until it's removed like so. Alright, now I'm going to clean the old solder off with a soldering iron. And now while we're pretending like this is a new capacitor. Now remember that gray blotched area. On this one it was facing out to the outside. So it's going to be like this, but just on the other side. Now, the whole point here is you got to just make sure to kind of line it up first. Now, let's see. I got a little bit of solder coming out, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this and hit it lightly and kind of get it to where there's not as much solder, so it's easier to get these prongs lined up. So you want to line them up first, as best you can anyways. And since one side is going to be longer, you're going to have to get that one hole started first. And one other thing. If you look, there's a little circle here where it was, and part of that circle is white. If you see, it's like kind of blotted out, and there's a little bit of white, and it's right over top of one of the connections. That's also a mark to show you where the positive is, so that the hole that's underneath the extra white part, I'm hoping you can see that when we get it closer. See how it's kind of white right there? That's the positive side. So there's another little tip for you, just to make sure you line them up correctly. Alright. So what I'm going to do now is I'm getting it lined up. I'm going to go ahead and start hitting the back with the solder again and getting it good and melted. So I'm just going back and forth with the soldering iron. Let's see if I can get a little bit better of a shot here. It's kind of hard to get this sort of crap and get a good shot with the camera. If I had 12 arms, this would be real easy. Alright, so I've got it kind of started here. No, apparently not. Sometimes it does take patience. It's kind of why I did it on one of these small ones for you guys, so that you can see that I'm struggling with it too a little bit here. Mainly though, I'm trying to get a good camera view as well as doing this. So. Quit moving on me there. gotta go back and hit this a little bit again because it's all, I can't get the prong in there. Okay. There we go. Alright. Now we got it in there pretty well, and I'm just going to keep going back and forth and slowly pushing the capacitor in a little bit at a time. Now, you don't want it to go all the way down and touch the board. So, but yeah, you see how that's in there pretty well now. And that's pretty much it. Hopefully you can see that well enough. I did have a little bit of trouble there for a second, but anyways, that's pretty much the gist of it. And usually you're not going to be able to replace just one capacitor. This is the one I just replaced. You're usually not going to be able to replace just one. Usually you're going to have several busted capacitors. So just make sure to check out everything and replace all the ones that were messed up, and you should be good. Now, if it isn't that, I mean, you could have something majorly wrong. If it's not a capacitor, it's something a lot worse than that. And, you know, it could be a MOSFET, which is one of these guys. You could get in and see if you could try to replace that. But it's a lot of work, and it's really hard to get those off. So, anyways, if that doesn't work, you either got the capacitor backwards, the plus and negative backwards, or there's another capacitor that's blown, or the board is just shot. So anyways, I hope this tutorial helped you guys. Make sure to subscribe. I do a lot of stuff like this, a lot of repair tutorials, case modding, stuff like that.